just, oops. I think I started the stream already. I did start the stream already. Okay. As a reminder, just as a reminder, next week is our last full week of class, and then we are here the Monday of Thanksgiving break. That's when the final paper is due, and then for us, we do still have one more day after Thanksgiving break, which is the 2nd of December. So that's when we're going to do review. So probably want to show up for that one.
How long is Thanksgiving break?
It is only, well, technically Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. For us, Wednesday and Thursday are the only ones that really count. Yes, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So we won't be here for Wednesday class that week, and for your Tuesday, Thursday classes, that also will be not here. And if you happen to have Friday classes, that's also not here.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, no problem. I know sometimes it's a full week, sometimes it's not.
I don't care. I don't want to end up coming into class and visiting.
Yep, that's fair. So yeah, well, for us, we're probably going to knock out the rest of the material today. So we'll figure something out to do for next week. You suggested the Dark Ages documentary, which is a good idea. If anybody else has any ideas as to what we might do next week to maintain class stuff, you're welcome to suggest it, as well as you folks online, because you're stuck with us too. So make any suggestions, which of course if it's a video, I'll just post the link of the video we watch on Blackboard rather than try to record it, because YouTube doesn't like that. But yeah, so that should be plenty of time. I'm trying to remember and I might also like briefly go over like the last Monday here, when it's just like turning in papers. I might also briefly go over the final 3 chapters of the book, so that those of you that are here for 104, I can like refer back to, hey, remember when Elizabeth did that crazy thing? I'll be real brief. There won't be a lot of major details you guys need to remember, but just a couple of things that I find interesting. Like, for example, banks were invented in I think it was Florence, Italy, because they had so much money they didn't have anywhere to put it. So banks were originally just like warehouses with locks on them where they put all their money, because Renaissance Italy was doing so well. Their biggest problem was not having anywhere to put all their money. So yeah, so just as a reminder, next week is the last full week of class, and then paper is due on the 25th, and then we have Thanksgiving break. And then after Thanksgiving break, we have one more day of class, which will just be a review day. And then I actually pulled this up. So this will be our Monday, Wednesday, 10 to 11:25, or 11:15. My brain can't work. That will be on Monday, December 9th, in here at 8:30. So despite the fact that this is a 10 o'clock class, you will be in here at 8:30 for that exam. Now, that said, since this class is so big, if you would rather not come in, actually let me grab this, or actually go right back to where we were. If you don't feel like coming in the last week of exams, I will be here, not Tuesday, that's reading day. That's also a day off everybody has. That Wednesday, I'm going to be here for my 101 course from, again, 8:30 to 10:30. If you want to come in and take it then rather than wait until the following week, you can. If you want to study, as much as you can until, the next Monday, you're welcome to. But I will be in here on that Wednesday. In fact, if all 3 of you come in that Wednesday, I just won't show up the next Monday. But if you want to wait, you're welcome to. That's totally fine. For my online students, I'm going to have to put the test up early, because I usually give you guys a week, And after this Tuesday, I have to turn in grades like the next day. So I need you guys to get it done. So for online students, I'm just going to go ahead and put it up on reading day. You don't need to do it on reading day because that's, the day everybody has off. But please get it done by the next week. I cannot extend it. It's not possible. I literally, once I turn these grades in and it's in the system, changing things is a right pain in the butt. I have to physically go up to Francis Marion and sign papers, and then it's a whole process from there. So please just turn your stuff in before. Yeah, that's all I've got. Any questions from you guys in here?
For online classes, does each teacher do things differently for the final exam?
No, it's sorry. Bleh. Does each teacher do something different? Probably. It's a lot of this is up to the professor. Like, we're given a lot of free reign. For me, I think a lot of professors probably only have it up the day of the exam, and like you have to get it done that day. But for me, I typically give a week, so I'm going to give a week. But yeah, it's up to the professor how they want to do it online. As far as the test itself, it's identical to what you guys get. I just have to put it up on Blackboard manually. Unfortunately, I can't copy and paste or just like attach or put the Word document in there because it has to be in a format that people can answer. But it's whatever. So yeah, that's the final exam. And again, for those of you that need to do a second paper, that's when. Here we go. That's when it's due. Is the 25th. I think actually. Let me see. I know you guys in here did your papers because you guys aren't hard to keep up with. Oh, I can't look at it here because it's all online. Yeah, if you haven't turned in the first paper, you want to do the second paper because I can only drop 1 0. If there's a test that you need dropped, do that second paper. If not, if you're doing fine grade-wise and you're happy with where you are, you don't have to do the second paper. You can take it off. Not worry about it. But that's up to y'all. I did have a student ask, and I guess I'll let you guys know here as well. If you do both papers, then I'll either drop whatever's lowest, even if like all your grades are pretty similar, or after the final, if it would help you out a couple of points for me to not drop anything, I just won't drop anything. Therefore, everything will be weighed slightly less. It'll be out of, well, normally it'd be 6, but out of 5 grades instead of 4. So whichever way helps you the most is what I will do. So if you skip something, that's an easy drop for me. If you don't skip it, I'll just add it all in and see which way works. So it's usually not that much of a difference whether I drop like a grade that's similar to all the other grades, because that's just how averaging works. But sometimes it'll be like a point or even half a point, and it'll be enough to push somebody from, say, a C to a B or a B to an A. So I like to see how the math works and do what's best for you guys. Okie dokie. Where did my mouse go? There it is. Yoink. Put that over here. And close that. And that can just stay there. All right. So let's get back into where we were. Which is to say the Black Death, which this is, well, I say the end of it, sort of. As I mentioned with religion, communal living, so the monasteries and whatnot were horribly affected by the Black Death, as well as, like we mentioned with doctors and gravediggers, the priests and whatnot were typically there to tend to the dying, to administer sacraments and hear their final confessions. the church was hit so hard number-wise that, as I mentioned here, the Bishop of Bath and Wells permitted that laymen and laywomen could hear confessions and administer sacraments, which was pretty much unheard of. There was also the flagellants, these weirdos, that went around and whipped themselves to atone for the sins that were the cause of the Black Death, which they only really succeeded in spreading it more, because when I say they whipped themselves, it was bad. They tore each other up. And then also just a weakening of Catholicism in general. This idea that all this pomp and show and grandeur, I mean, everything was gold-plated, that maybe that wasn't all that necessary. Also, we have another papal schism. So 1377, Gregory the 11th, take a second there to read Roman numerals, returned the papacy to Rome. As we'd seen at the beginning of the chapter, the papacy had been moved to Avignon. He moved the papacy back to Rome because, well, that's where the papacy was meant to be originally. He died the next year, so there wasn't a lot of time for his court to really take hold. So Urban VI was elected by the cardinals, but Charles V of France wanted the papacy to return to Avignon. And when Urban refused, he created a new pope, Clement VII, for Avignon. And again, to our Protestant sensibilities, none of that really means anything. But for Catholicism, especially back then, the Pope was supposed to be inerrant. The Pope was supposed to be infallible. Not sinless, because only Jesus was sinless, but this idea that once you were made Pope, you are basically, to put it crassly, I guess, you're being puppeteered by God. You are doing what God wants, and therefore can do no wrong. However, here we have two popes, and you can't do that. You can't have two dudes saying they speak for God and when they say different things. It doesn't quite work out. So they held a council at Pisa in 1409, declared both popes heretics, and thus elected a third pope. And despite the fact they declared both popes heretic, neither of them actually left. So we now had three popes. Once again, compounding the issue. Council of Constance, all three were deposed. They elected Martin V. When Martin died, another anti-pope was elected in France. I know it's a weird freaking word, but the anti-pope was actually very powerful because, well, he held essentially half of Catholicism under his control, at least that in France. And it wasn't until 1449, a good, 40 years later, that they actually ended up clearing this up at the Council of Basel. And this led to the conciliar movement. Basically, the council at Basel, or Basel, I guess, made it so that a church council had the authority to depose the Pope. But like we will see, especially next semester, with royal rulers, only the Pope, or in the case of the royal rulers, only the kings, could call the council. So they were very wary of calling said council because, they were able to depose the Pope. So if you call them in because there was some issue in the church, they might just say, the issue is your fault, you no longer have a job. And they kick you out of your papacy office. So the councils existed, but they were rarely called on because, the only person who could call them was the Pope, and if they were called, it was probably so bad that they might just decide that the Pope in charge is not doing a very good job. So it's a whole thing. We will see this next semester, especially in France, with the various Louis not calling in the Estates General for like 200 years or something, which is the Estates General was their version of Parliament or Congress. But only the leader could call them in, and when he called them in, they'd be pissed and would want some authority taken away from the king. So very similar stuff to what we're seeing here. Obviously, not everybody thought that the church was doing a very good job because, well, we've just had 3 freaking popes. We had to call in a council of what were essentially regular churchmen. Now, obviously, they'd be like bishops or England, even cardinals. But technically, these were people who were not the pope having authority over the pope, which was not how it was supposed to be. So John Wycliffe criticized the church's claim of being universal. This was, again, this idea that, oh, yeah, the church speaks for everybody because, we're speaking for God, and therefore we have authority over ecclesiastical things. However, he didn't like that they were splitting their attention between ecclesiastical problems and political or worldly problems. The obvious example here would be the whole Avignon papacy thing, where the Pope, again, meant to be this mouthpiece of God, was essentially under the authority of just some dude. I mean, yeah, he was the king of France, but compared to who was supposed to be like God's man, was just some dude. He also translated the Bible into English, which was a no-no. Bibles were only written in Latin, and the only way to learn Latin was to join the church, like work for the church. So, for example, Mass, you'd go to church, and they would read out of the Bible in Latin, and you wouldn't know what they were saying, but it was probably important. But more importantly, people could not read the Bible for themselves. If the Pope said, or well, not just the Pope, but like the priest said that whatever he was reading out of the Bible said that peasants should give tithe to the church, and if they didn't, God will be mad at them, then how do they know any different? So translating the Bible into something that regular folk can read was a pretty big deal. And again, this is like a major part of what we would see with the Protestant Reformation. His followers were called Lollards or idlers because, well, he was in England and the English always had really weird names for people. A Lollard is just like English slang for idlers. His train of thought continued through much of the 15th century because, well, after he died, his people continued it on. We also have Jan Hus. He was from Bohemia. Pushed for the primacy of the Bible over a rich, worldly, and corrupt church. So again, much like we had with John Wycliffe, that we should read the Bible and decide what the Bible says, as opposed to this church that has, to use a phrase that's now really ironic in this case, more money than God, because they had so much money. Well, he spoke out against the church. They invited him to the Council of Constance in 1415, promising him safe passage. When he got there, he was arrested, charged with heresy, and burned at the stake. The church wasn't really into keeping their word. And finally, we have Lorenzo Valla, Italian, was he a map maker? I don't remember what Valla was up to before he did all this. Italian humanist. Okay. So he was like in an academic. He proved the falsehood of the donation of Constantine, which was this document that supposedly gave lots of land to the papacy from again, literally Emperor Constantine, the guy that started the Holy Roman Empire. However, he proved that it was a forgery. It used language that was more modern than what they used in the time of Constantine, as well as a couple of other things that very much proved that the donation of Constantine was a forgery. And obviously that really pissed off the church. However, Alphonse I was the king of Aragon, Sicily, and Naples. Aragon is part of modern-day Spain, and of course Sicily and Naples being part of, Sicily is its own thing. And Naples is, I want to say, part of Italy. Anyway, if you're looking at these and wondering why only Jan Hus got killed, things were a little bit more open in England. You could be a little bit more critical, because while they were still very much part of the Catholic Church, the Anglican stuff wouldn't come until later. They were still removed enough that you could be a bit more critical without getting burned at the stake. Jan Hus was right in the middle of the Holy Roman Empire. He was not in a good place to be speaking out against the church. And Lorenzo Valla, while he really pissed off the church, he was under the protection of the Italian king. And while you would think that people in Italy would be more aligned with the church, when it came to especially the Italian city-states, they did as much as they could to maintain their own power and not bow to the papacy. So that's why Valla did not get himself burned at the stake like poor Jan Hus did. So there is John Wycliffe, Jan Hus. Again, not treated too well. This exact image is in the book, although the book has some writing above it from them days. And then here we have Lorenzo Valla. Declamation against the donation of Constantine, Demotte, the forged document. Let's see. Does it say? No. Okay. And this was also used in the Protestant Reformation later on to prove that, like, a lot of what the church had was gained. I shouldn't say taken, but gained by illegal means, or at least unscrupulous means, which, like, for what was supposed to be the representation of Jesus, was probably not that great. Anyway. So, due to the plague killing off, lots of people, many nobles were left without income to support their liege lords, because, a noble was given land by the king, and then would use that land to have peasants work it and basically tax them to make money, and then use that money to raise an army to go and fight for the king. So it was, it was a cycle that worked until a plague came through and killed a bunch of people. So while kings were not able to call upon their nobles to support them in battle, they soon realized that as long as they had the money, they could hire mercenary armies. And typically mercenaries are seen as, kind of scummy and just being there for the money, which, to be fair, once the money runs out, they will split. But mercenary armies were more professional than your royal army, because royal armies were typically made up of the nobles, who were at least trained to fight, and then just a bunch of dudes they brought with them. Mercenaries, their job was to fight. Their job was to be as good as they could be on the battlefield, and also to protect themselves on the battlefield. So they had good armor, good weapons, and were just, like, man for man, better than what you'd get from an actual noble warrior. And then also, we're starting to get into greater levels of technology. Cannons, for example. sieges were no longer in the benefit of the defender. We were now able to just blast down the defender's walls and invade the city. Used to be, as I think I brought this up in American history, when you want to attack a fortified location, you need to have like 3 times as many guys as the defenders do. The defenders have, say, 300 the 300 guys defending it. You need to have like 900. That's because, well, they're in a defensive location. They've got cover. They're typically firing from arrows, at least before cannons, from like a higher location. They're much harder to hit. You're much easier to hit. And while you're trying to breach the walls or bust through the gate, you're a sitting target. So you need a lot of dudes to just throw bodies at them until they run out of arrows. Or at least just completely overpower them. With cannons, you brought in a cannon and you shot the wall down. That negated a lot of that benefit. Still, though, nobles not only were meant to provide military support to the king, they were also meant to provide money to the king. And with the nobles losing money, they couldn't really afford to support the king as much. So one of the ways to make money, again, is to make new taxes, because typically taxes, it wasn't like modern day where you feel it seems like you get a new tax every couple of months. Taxes were set for like specific things, typically like a land tax, but even that wasn't perpetual. It had to be renewed every few years. A lot of times taxes would be specifically for like a war, like we're having a war, we're going to pass this tax for trade or whatever, and then once the war is over, the tax expires and that's it. Tax was not a common way of making money back then. It was usually, as I've said, the peasants would work the land, and then to pay what was basically their rent, they would either give a percentage of what they made or what they produced to the noble, or that equivalent in money. That was typically where you got the money from. So to make new taxes, which typically affected the nobility, the king had to call in a council. And like I said with the council with the Pope, councils typically asked for something in return, which usually meant weakening the power of the king. So the king, who was the only one who could call a council and needed to call a council to pass taxes so that he could, continue fighting wars, would oftentimes have his power reduced because the nobility wouldn't allow these taxes to pass unless he agreed to certain things. So that's a furthering of the a further shift in the power from the king to the nobility. The king was still on top, but his power base was gradually going away. And actually, I just said this here. When we get to the French Revolution, this is like a big part of it. So the 100 Years' War has still been going on, like during this entire thing. We talked about it at the beginning of the chapter, and during the Black Death, they were still fighting this war. I can use this as an excuse to shill one of my favorite games. There is a game called I lost the name. Innocence. A Plague Tale: Innocence. That's it. It's you basically are taking the role of a young French girl and her little brother who are basically have been run out of their home by English soldiers and are trying to get across the countryside while the plague is happening. So you not only have a war happening, which they are very much not equipped to take part in, but a soldier will very much stab a child. But also the plague is happening, and since this is a video game, they also like really make the plague almost demonic. Like it isn't just people dying of, the bubonic plague, but it's like swarms of rats spilling out of holes like water almost, and just covering people and eating them to the bone. And the only way you can keep them back is by some sort of light source. But also, in a lot of places, you're trying to not get shot by dudes with crossbows, so you've got to figure out whether you want to use this light source to not get eaten by rats, or try to go quietly and in the dark and not get shot by dudes with crossbows. So it's the whole thing. It's a big struggle of just how the civilians of the time would have dealt with this. And it's also, despite the fantastical elements, a really interesting look at, just the countryside of France during a war and a worldwide plague. It's really good. It's a lot of fun. There is a sequel that I've yet to get, but the first one's really good. I can say that much. The ending's weird. Like I said, it gets really fantastical. But as far as like you literally crossing a battlefield after the battles happen, so there's just bodies everywhere and rats and buzzards just like eating them. It's really horrific. But I'm a big fan of games giving you a real feel of how things used to be. Because a movie can do that, but with a game you're living it. You're a part of it a bit more. Anyway, 100 Years' War. There are a few decades of the war cooling off, as well as a civil war in France, because of course the French are going to fight a civil war over who's supposed to be ruling them while they're still fighting the English. And during this Cold War, I should specifically mention that there were still like roving bands of mercenaries and knights who weren't really getting paid, so they would go around and like burn villages and take stuff from people and just kill civilians for fun. This Cold War, while there weren't as many big battles between groups of knights, the civilians were still feeling the pain of the war. Eventually, we had the King Henry V of England, who ramped the war back up. By 1415, once again, he was outnumbered by the French and kicked their butts at the Battle of Agincourt. Once again, English archers and the poor strategy on the side of the French. So even though it's been almost 100 years, the French are still not doing a very good job of just not getting surrounded. The French deposed the Dauphin, which is the heir to the throne. That's the equivalent of the Prince of Wales in England, and just many other titles across Europe. And they let the King of England take his place. He married the king's daughter, and by 1420 began claiming his territory by force. So despite the fact that, it was technically the war was over, because now the English king was on the French throne, the French people weren't letting it happen, and he was having to go out and murder lots of civilians with military force. So here we have Agincourt, again the appropriate range for archers. Here's actually Agincourt. So what ended up happening, since Henry's forces were much smaller, they allowed the French to come in, to push them back, and then they pushed them back in between two big rows of archers who then just like laid down death from the flanks. And as I've said with the Romans, especially when we're talking about Hannibal, especially when you have, they weren't quite as inflexible as the Romans, but when you've got this intense, powerful charge forward, suddenly getting hit from the flanks is an immediate crush of morale. You've got your shields in the front, you're ready to fight the dude in front of you, and then you're getting hit from both sides by death. That makes you want to retreat. And Charles d'Humbert, D'Albert, rather, the leader of the French at the time, very much made for the road and got out of there. So, the war was not yet over, despite the fact that it really should have been. The Dauphin Charles called on a resistance to fight against the English, and one of the people who joined his call was Joan of Arc, a barely 18-year-old farm girl who, convinced she had been receiving messages from God that she was going to help to restore the French throne. Now, at the start, they just sort of saw her as some crazy weirdo that was showing up saying she was seeing things, and also being a girl, not like they're going to listen to that. But they were so desperate, they let her lead a charge, or a force to Orleans, which was under siege by the English. And they were very successful, which is why she's also known as the Maid of Orleans, or Orleans, I should say. So she continued to aid the resistance, and in July, Charles was crowned as Charles VII in Reims. So now we technically have a French king again. So the next goal was to retake Paris, because, obviously that's the main seat of power in France. However, Charles was too slow to agree. He had agreed to a treaty from the Burgundians, which were the faction that were fighting him during the French Civil War. So the attack was postponed. She led the attack anyway, ended up captured and given to the English. She was captured by the Burgundians, not even the English. She was then given to the English, put on trial as a heretic because, well, she claimed she was hearing the voice of God. And as we have seen in American history, that was like one of the reasons people were burned at the stake for being a witch, is if you're a woman and think that God's talking to you. But also apparently like cross-dressing, because she dressed as a male soldier. There wasn't women's armor. And she was burned at the stake. So despite the heroism that she was able to accomplish, she was captured and killed. However, her actions did not end the war, but it showed England that France was not just going to roll over and let them take over. So there was still a lot of just regular civilians who were on the side of the French royalty. And gradually, which we'll get into in the next slide, the English were slowly pushed out of France. They just couldn't hold on to it. It's kind of similar to what we see with the American Revolution, where England just sort of realized that it would be way too much trouble to try to quell all the dissent, so they just swore off of it. Here's the image in the book. Joan insisted on dressing as a soldier, participating in relieving the siege of Orleans. Later executed for heresy by the English, who cited cross-dressing as a sign of heretical depravity and stubbornness. She was certainly stubborn. I'll give them that. Speaking of stubborn, though, and specifically Joan of Arc, this is one of my favorite stories to tell. So, she was brought to England to be put on trial and burned at the stake. So she was burned at the stake in England, and all of her possessions were kept by the English. So somehow, I don't know exactly what happened, which with England, you can go to any street and someone there is like a dealer in antiques. And antiques in England are several hundred years old, as opposed to here where it's like, oh, it's 50 years old, it's an antique. It's like, whatever. Anyway, so some private collector managed to get his hands on Joan of Arc's ring. I guess this particular ring that she wore in life, and decided to just give it to friends. He just was like, hey, Oh well.
Sound good?
See you later.
God bless you.
So I just realized that I hadn't turned my mic on. I apologize. So, has there been people watching? Well, the stream's running at least. Huh, it doesn't say it's... Oh, no. I don't know if you guys have been seeing this at all. Oh, no, we do. Okay. So, I'll redo this when I get home. I apologize for that. That was very unprofessional on my part. Yeah, so I'll just redo this when I get home. I'll see y'all later. Bye.